Hey guys, Disaster here with a bit of a different video from the usual stuff, although still very much within the world of competitive Pokemon. What I really want to cover in this team builder video, first of all, it's not tier specific. I will be pulling examples, mainly from Advanced OU and Advanced 50. It's the two tiers I play the most at the moment, but I'll probably pull a bit from like other tiers as well, like maybe DPPOU or RBY or something. What this really is about being able to evaluate whether a team is good, and through being able to evaluate that beyond simply just testing, which of course is important. I'll get to that later. Then you can become a better player, like across all tiers, not just whatever you're playing right now. But if you start like Black and White RU in a year, then you'll be able to hit the ground running a bit better if your team building fundamentals are a bit better. Just as much as your play, obviously, this is one of the two big parts of competitive Pokemon. You've got the play and you've got the building, and this, like, my bread and butter really is the building. That's where my strengths lie, and other people are maybe able to pilot my things better than I can, like linear and SPL, for example. But yeah, it's an important skill. I think everybody should be good at it, and it's getting better at building make you a better player, and vice versa. So with that, I've put quite a bit of thought into it. And after thinking about things for a while, I decided to present things in this way. This is not the only way you can look at it. It's just my perspective and sort of a way I've tried to structure things, just to sort of cover all of the ideas I wanted to cover in like a streamlined manner. And so, yeah, really, after some thought, it's clear to me that teams need both offensive and defensive synergy, and we'll sort of talk about like what that means when it comes to like offense teams and stall teams and so on, because they have different needs, right? But even offensive teams need some defensive synergy. Even stall teams need some kind of offensive synergy, if you can call it that, in terms of like a strategy of how they're beating the opponent's team, even if that's like toxic stall, toxic spikes, all of that. Which sometimes it is. And I broke that down sort of into like specific factors of that as well, which I'll sort of go through in greater detail. And I'll also sort of be providing examples and so on. So, well, with the offensive synergy, what am I talking about in terms of like the focus targeting? And this is something that can vary quite a bit, metagame by metagame. But the idea is that in some way or another, you want your team to be built so that you can achieve your offensive goals. So that can mean a lot of things depending on the metagame. Like some metagames will have different options, but like an obvious example is pairing like Magneton and Choice Band Salamence in Advanced OU. Is you're pairing those so the Magneton traps Skarmory, and then CV mounts can like break stuff better or whatever. But there's a lot of different forms of this, and it's good to keep that in mind, because like when you're in a metagame that doesn't have trapping or something like that, or is like so well like understood that there's not many lure options, it's like, well, how do you go about generating offense? And sometimes even in tiers where you do have those options, that's not how you want to do it. So like there is direct trapping of like your checks and counters. And there is lures as well, like HP Grass, DD Tar, and OU, which obviously can lure Swampert for like Aerodactyl later in the game, or HP Fire Glalie in ADV 50 is like a one that's popping up at the moment in the tier, which is a lure to Fortress. And then beyond that, there is just using offensive Pokemon with similar answers. So just like even like a HP Bug DD or whatever can still wear down Swampert. You can still pair that with an Aerodactyl, or you can run like Tauros and Kadabra together in ADV50 since they both target Sableye and Aggron, and you can run like Golduck and Electrode together because they both target Lantern in different ways. Like that's the thrust of it. But you can overdo it. I think that's harder to do when there isn't like trapping in the tier. And it's like all of this, like there's some stuff that's subjective that we'll be discovering, but a lot of it is very much like subjective as well. And like for me, for example, I think you shouldn't run like Tree-Span Metagross and Magneton together in OU. It's not going to be like horrendously awful. They're two decent Pokemon, but you're just like going in too much and trap on like breaking Skarmory. Unless you got a team that like desperately needs that, but is probably a bad idea. And like the reason why it's bad isn't that it won't work. It's that you're making trade-offs. And it can be a bit nebulous. Like you're running CB Gross and Magneton. Like, well, if you're running like Metagross and Magneton, then you could run like an agility Metagross or like a defensive Metagross. So it's like there's other options there that you're not exploring, and it will probably matter in some way. Like you'll be like weaker against a certain threat, or you won't be able to sweep as easily if you don't have agility growth or something. But what that problem is will vary team by team. And also a team can be like solid enough that just because you've got like this unnecessary redundancy, it doesn't mean that you can't like A, win games, and B, have good matchups. So it is something that players can be like a victim of. Or like another example is maybe like running like Marowak and Armaldo together in OU, which I've seen players do, and I've lost to it. And it's not that it's so bad you can't lose to it. It's just that there's like really big trade-offs to that you can't necessarily manage with like the rest of your team. And that's what the targeting being like focused is all about. I mean, with Marowak and Armaldo, it's less about like the over focusing on the targeting and more just like the lack of defensive synergy because they're two Pokemon that really don't check anything. Like Armaldo checks like Snorlax, and like Marowak doesn't even do that. So that's sort of like what that's about, the focused targeting concept, and that's like really like the bread and butter of what makes offense. But like on stall as well, and it is it's not something that players find like as tangible or like have as much experience in, but it's like sometimes to make like a certain kind of progress, like you might need to target like a certain wall, just like making sure you can toxic it or something like that. Like ensuring that you're not going to be like, I don't know, just like say you're in OU and you've got like a Spikes team. It might sound silly, but you do need to be able to beat like Zapdos and Skarmory and Gengar all together at the end in like an end game, or like Flygon, and like your spikes don't work in that context. Maybe the toxic doesn't work if it's like Skarmory and Gengar. It's like just making sure that you have like a way of beating like those pairings in like the late game, or like running pairs on like Celebi so that you beat like Carmine Suicune. Like that's what focused targeting might look like on a stall team or like a slow paced balance team. Obviously, we can like argue about like definitions about like what makes a team a certain kind of team, but it's not material here because these concepts apply to all kinds of teams that they apply in different ways, like offensive versus stall teams, and in metagames like RBY OU where teams don't vary to the same degree that they do in like other metagames, some of these things become like less important to think about, and in some ways it makes team building easier in those metagames, and at the same time it can make it like really difficult because it's like, well, how do I choose between like a small number of good options? But that's part of what gives that metagame its color and like that generation as well, because it's like really that case, and like even at the lower tiers as well, to a degree. Like RBYNU maybe less so because it is a bit more diverse, but you get the picture. And then like this idea of like suitable pacing as well. And this is one where like I could do see players like making this mistake, but it can also be like a bit nebulous and not necessarily like easy to punish, especially like depending on your matchup. But it's basically making sure you don't run a slow team that doesn't have like the tools to deal with that problem. So like if you've got like weather sweepers, make sure you have like rain dance on them or whatever. Like that's pretty obvious, but like I don't know, I see players like an ADV 50 running like Choice Band Golem on like a fast paced offense team, and it's like this Pokemon doesn't resist very much. It's not going to come in much. It's choice locked moves. It hits hard, but there's also like a lot of immunities around. So like you're not going to get it in much, and it can be like very all or nothing because of that. And if you put it on like a slower placed like offensive team, or like gave it paralysis support or something like that, then maybe it'll perform like a lot better. And that's like an example. And like you'll see like stall teams as well. Like they'll be like relying on like toxic and spikes and so on. So plus like using like slow Pokemon, like I don't know, like Martina and ADV 50 or like Muck, or in like ADV you might be talking like Skarbliss and Fortress and Pursuit Time. So like all these slow Pokemon usually. I mean, it's part of why they run Gengar so much in like TSS, is to give that kind of team like some more speed. I mean, often like on TSS you might get like a sixth Pokemon that's like pretty quick as well. But like if your team is like slow and it doesn't have like paralysis support and there's like not much else to it, then like you need to like have the defensive solidness to justify it. So you can't be running like a team that's full of slow glass cannons. It just doesn't work. I mean, you don't really get like slow glass cannons. You get the picture. Like you need to be like ship shape airtight. To justify like having a slow team like that. And like in once choice cards introduced in like Gen 4 and so on, then you'll see like store teams almost always like carrying like a scarf tile or something like that is like the kind of idea of like having one fast Pokemon that like for various reasons, like even stuff like absorbing trick, providing a cleaner of some kind and so on. Like there's a lot of merits to that on like those still like very bulky stallish teams, they have like a bit of speed control as well. And in like ADV, like the methods of speed control, well, you don't have choice scarf, and that really does change things. I mean, choice scarf just like simplifies the problem so much that if it was in ADVO, you'd probably be running it a lot, on a lot of different kinds of teams. But yeah, that's that's a fun what if. My goodness, I'm saying so much. My bad. I'm like thinking about things. Like I've got like notes that I'm using as prompts, but at the same time, there's like a level of off the cuffness to it. So yeah, that's what like the cohesion of pace thing's about, and I feel like those are like suitable pacing. Like I don't know whether exactly you want to classify it under like offensive, like this is about like the streamlining ideas, and like defensive synergy is should say of course that like offensive teams need more offensive synergy, defensive teams need more, like storage teams need more defensive synergy and balance. It's like really important to have like both. but even on like offense you need a little bit of defensive synergy, and on stall, I mean, we were talking about like how maybe it's just about like having enough users of toxic or something like that. Might constitute offensive synergy on stall, or maybe in like ADVU because there's like a lot of trapping and just stall does make use of it like an awful lot. Like you know, you can have like Curse Lax with like Magneton, and then you like return an EQ on it. like that kind of offensive synergy. Even though you're talking about like a stall team, there's still offensive synergy going on there. Yeah, defensive synergy is like two parts to this as well that I sort of wanted to pick up on, like defensive stability overall. This is just a matter of just like not losing to the damn metagame. And like methodologically, like the first thing you should be doing, like when you've got like 3 or 4 Pokemon, is like figuring out what the team's weaknesses are, because you need to ensure that like whatever you're adding at the end gives you sufficient play against those weaknesses. And then like testing as well, like on the ladder and so on, is then about like not only getting comfortable with the team, which of course like can be very important, but also like finding those like little weaknesses and learning from them and deciding, well, is the team like weak to this? Like, is this like so bad that I have to throw the team out, or is this just like a bit of a threat? But if I'm conscious of that, I can adjust my play appropriately, and yada yada. The team still has merit. And that's what like the defense stability is about. And you can look as well at like pairwise synergy, like for example, like Muck and Meganium in ADV50. Muck's like ground weak, like Sandslash and Whiskash, Nidoqueen, Camerupt, and so on, like all pressure it. And Meganium checks some of those, or like Misdreavus is like the idea there, or an OU, like Salamence and Metagross is like a more offensive example of Pokemon that have good defensive synergy. Just like they've got like relatively few weaknesses and they resist each other's weaknesses in large part. And that's part of why they're a good offensive pairing, is because they have that good defensive synergy. And I want to sort of like draw attention to like type stacking and stuff as well. And in some metagames like RBIU is happening. You're running 4 normal types. That's the metagame. Well, 3 normal types. That's the metagame. But in tiers where there's more options, not type stacking tends to become more important. I would say in ADV, there are situations you can get away with it to some degree. In later generations, there's fewer situations just because there's more threats usually. So it does depend a bit on like how many threats there are, how varied the metagame is, and so on. But when you stack 2 Pokemon that have like similar typings, like a crazy example might be like Milotic and Vaporeon together in a DVOU. Like that's, to any ADVOU player, that's like obviously like a pretty senseless pairing. You're just like stacking weaknesses and not really achieving anything for it. But sometimes in ADVOU you do see like these weird pairings. Like it can be like metagame specific. Like a few years ago, like Double Water was seen as a bit more of a thing, like Swampert and Suicune. Like in the olden days, to a degree, even today, like Swampert and Flagon, 2 ground types together because they check electrics in like a synergistic way. Or like Double Blob, which is something I faced like yesterday with like Snorlax and Blissey. And like these ideas like that are about like getting these absurd matchups almost. Like special offense is just gonna be pretty hopeless if you see like Blissey and Snorlax together. But then if you run like physical offense against that, then all of a sudden there's a lot less resistance to get through. And that's like the trade-off of like those sorts of things. And it's not that when you stack Pokemon that do similar roles or have similar typings, it's not like objectively always bad. But what you're doing is like giving the team lopsided matchups, which can be good in a tournament setting, perhaps. But for general purpose use, that might be bad just because like the trade-offs of like running Snorlax and Blissey. I mean, they're both good Pokemon, but you make your team like slow and vulnerable to like a lot of physical attacks. I mean, they resist like nothing as well. So then you've got to like really pack physical checks on like the rest of the team and fit like the roles you need and stuff as well. So, yeah, those trade-offs could be worth it as like in situations as an anti-metagame pick, if like something's really common. Um, but those sorts of ideas tend to be less effective in the long term and less effective when like done repeatedly. And just like bad practice, like there are ways of breaking that rule and it working out, as I said. But for the most part, if you want to make a team that's going to objectively be like decent in the long run, you should largely avoid type stacking. To a degree as well, it like depends on like how defensively useful like Pokemon of those types are. Like if it's a good defensive type like Steel or Water, then that helps. And like if one of those Pokemon is like a Fortress or something where it's like in practice you're not able to make use of most of its resistances because it's got like a big specific weakness, then like running like Fortress and Aggron together in ADV 50 or like Skarmory and Metagross together in ADVOU isn't a bad thing. Like they might not even share weaknesses and you might be like getting the practical uses of those resistances out a lot better from doing that. So that's the thinking there. Is that one's definitely a rule with like more of an asterisk on it than other rules, but it should be like a red flag or at least like a yellow flag when you see a team with like two Pokemon or more that are the same type or that do like really similar things. And you got to say, well, is this justified? What's been the trade-off? Like, have they somehow magically managed to trick a team that still like handles the rest of the metagame fine and features two crazy special rules? Like, probably not quite. Have they managed to fit like two steel types together and made it work? It's pretty likely. So, it depends, and it's definitely like a more subjective area when it comes to that. And finally, the last thing that I wanted to touch on was this idea of like the appropriate support. And like some of this might sound obvious. Well, I mean, I hope sort of most of what I was saying sounds obvious, but I'm really targeting like players who are newer, like less experienced, or maybe just want to improve their building and like maybe there'll be like a nugget or two in here that like really makes a difference for you. And I'll be going over like some more advanced concepts a bit later on. But this one's probably gonna sound like pretty dumbed down. It's like make sure the support you're providing is warranted. Like don't run rapid spin on a Superman team. Like I don't really see people doing that very much. Or like heal bell on hyper offense. Like sometimes certain support isn't necessary and like don't use it. Just it's probably something better you can be doing with like that move slot or that Pokemon slot. The other thing is make sure that like necessary support is provided. So like if you run like SD lefty stand slash no, you need like paralysis support for it, or yeah, I don't know. Like if you're running return earthquake curse lax in OU, make sure you've got pursuit support for it. That's the kind of thing where it's like provided like necessary stuff, but most support kind of fits in the gray area where like some support is nice to have, but it's not necessary. Like Curse Lax likes weather clearing support, it likes heal bell support. But you can make a good Curse Lax team to the extent you can make a good Curse Lax team. You can make a good one without either of those things in it because neither is truly necessary. And by fitting those support options, you're making other compromises on the build, and that's where things get like a lot more delicate and things get better with practiced experience and being like knowing how to balance like fitting all the support you want versus making sure the team is like defensively solid. So it's like an area with trade off. Or like Wish on Blissey like in OU is something people like. And there's a lot of Pokemon that appreciate the support, but sometimes like Blissey can't fit it all. Maybe there's only like one or two Pokemon you really would want to wish to, or something like that. Like there's some stuff that's definitely optional, and making the best choices out of like those optional things. It's hard to do. Maybe it takes practice, and it's probably like the least useful thing for evaluating like is a team good or not by like how much optional support has it fit, because it's more a prism you can look at things through. Like, wow, well, this team doesn't have rapid spin support, but why is that? Is it just because like most of the spinners are not very good, and the team just has like a bunch of really good Pokemon? Like something silly sounding like that, but like that's really sort of what happens. Um, that's where sort of the gray area is, and like this is. I think the extreme examples are important because you can't have like a Cursac that can't hit Gengar and no way of removing Gengar on your team. Like that's just bad. But you can run like Hariyama and OU without Wish. I'd say you need Sand. I think like Sand and Knockoff are necessary. I think Sand isn't necessary for knockoff users in OU to really like bring the point home of like that loss of leftovers, like make it sting. But yeah, kind of like lost my train of thought like a little bit. But yeah, that's the big picture stuff that I wanted to talk about really, in terms of what makes a team cohesive. So, are like other things I sort of want to add on top of this, like in terms of like methodologies, like finding a core to start off with, like finding a core. You can look at what Pokemon like have these defensive or offensive synergies, like Metagross and Salamence, or Golduck and Electrode. Like looking at like those offensive ideas, like what does this Pokemon lure, or what does it wear down, or what can it trap, or whatever, and then think about like what Pokemon like that, what Pokemon also are checked by these Pokemon, but can like wear the down in the long run, and so on. Like those are concepts that you can use to build a core and get a team going. So that's picking your first like 1 to 3 Pokemon, and then you need to think about what support do you need, and consider what support might be nice as well, but not necessary. That's sort of the next stage of it. And the third stage is like going through the metagame, looking at the big threats and being like, well, what ones are problems right now, like defensively? And maybe also like, are there any walls that this team like really struggles to break as well, or something like that? And then you look at what Pokemon help against those things and what Pokemon provide the support you like, and you try and make the best of everything. And that's where experience, expertise, understanding the metagame make a big difference. Like if you understand the metagame better, you'll be able to understand how effectively can these Pokemon answer like X, Y, and Z threat. How much do you need to answer Golduck in ADV50? Like, can you be fine with just a Lantern? Do you need to go like Muck and Sceptile and then your own Golduck and Tauros and stuff as well? Like, how much do you need? And that takes practice and experience, and there's no like golden rules on like how to really get that right. And it's where like team building stops being like completely algorithmic, and that's where the difference between like an okay team, a playable team, a good team, and then a great team like start to come into the picture. And then like the last thing I sort of want to touch on is thinking about things in terms of like sequences and so on, which is something I'm not very good at, to be honest, in terms of like planning out like an opening sequence of like what happens against this lead and that lead and so on. I've thought about it like a lot in RBY, like when I played that actively, because I played that for years, and the options are so narrow. You can feasibly consider like there's only like 5, now maybe like 6 different leads that you'll ever see. And it's like, well, you figure out what's a lead supposed to do in like all 6 of those matchups, and what are your options and so on. And even then, it started to get like quite disgusting with like Sing Chansey in the back and like ideas like that, making things less deterministic as well. like deterministic in terms of the choices you make, although like probabilities impact things anyway. Even if you have like Starmie versus Jinx, like, you know, Jinx might not hit Lovely Kiss the first time, might hit it the third time or something like that, but fundamentally the way you play that matchup's going to be pretty consistent, irrespective of like your sets and so on. But yeah, in tiers like ADVAU where like or ADV50 where the meta game where the leads vary like so much more, it can be harder to do that, but like some players really like thinking in that way. But the other sort of way I want to think about it is in like positive and negative loops. And this is a concept I got from Cowboy Dan. So shout out to him. Like he talked about like at the time like how he liked arrows so much because in his experience it was really good at creating these positive loops. And what I mean by a positive or a negative loop is that you got like a sequence of like you and your opponent switching between like 2 or 3 different people clicking certain moves. The end result of like cycling through that or whatever is that, well, maybe you've both accrued some shit, maybe you've burned some PP, but in the end you've come out better or worse because of it. And then considering like what happens with that, like continually, are there ways for each side to break the loop if it's not working for them and so on? And that tug of war is fundamentally what a lot of Pokemon's about, at least in like medium to slower pace meta games. Especially in like slow pace meta games like GSC. Well, it's not so slow paced these days, but you get the picture. Like, you know, like meta games where things are like, I mean, I guess RBY is probably like, funnily enough, like a good example of like a slower paced meta game where you've got these loops and you've got like these Pokemon like burning down in their PP. Are they making like the progress that they need and so on? And like, how can you like create those loops? And it can be a way of I sort of talk about like the tick box method, just like going through all the threats. Like you might have defensively answered a threat and think, well, that's fine, and then in practice you still end up having problems with it because you can't break a loop versus it. And I've got an example of a team that I threw out really in ADV50. And on paper, like this team like answers all the major threats. It does. It lacks spikes, so one of the big problems is its breaking abilities. But I want to talk about like the loop that you get against Nidoqueen plus Fortress. Let's say, for example, that I have Muck in, and then Nidoqueen comes in. Pretty reasonable. Muck can't really do much to it. It can't be poisoned by Sludge Bomb. At the most, I can burn it with Fire Blast, but that's like a pretty low chance, and it's probably not the move I'm clicking anyway. But like you think, well, that's fine. I've got a Whiscash. I could just go to my Whiscash, and then that's cool. Whiscash does like take nothing from like Nidoqueen, so like, well, that loop's still pretty good. I mean, Nidoqueen can poison Whiscash with Sludge Bomb. The odds are good, but not great. And that's not necessarily the move it's going to be clicking out of like Muck anyway. But then Fortress comes in, and like maybe you can do like 25% with Surf if you're lucky, and then it heals with leftovers, and you don't have any spikes up. And then like the way that this team punishes that is Absol, like sub Sword Stance, and Muck. And as we see, like Muck will just bring in Nidoqueen again, and then the loop repeats. So it's like, well, can Absol break the loop? And the answer is like, no, it can't either, because it's just not strong enough, and it's like a little bit slower than Nidoqueen, and it doesn't have like stab, and it doesn't hit Nidoqueen super effectively. Like for all those reasons, it's just like not good at it. Isn't sufficient to break that loop, even though it's better than Muck might be. And like because this team can't really break that loop easily, like Amaldo can like hope to help, and you can like pivot around a bit, but ultimately this team just gets in a negative loop against Nidoqueen and Fortress. It's just not like you always see it like every game at all, but you'll see it like 10% of games or something like that, and that's like a really substantial issue. And it just ends up in a negative loop versus that, and it's like not much you could really do to get out of it because like no explosion, no spikes, like none of these other tools as well. And that's what made this team that, like, on paper, it should be all right. Like, I'm not saying it's like I thought this team was going to blow the world away when I made it, but I was like, well, I think it's all right. I think Sub SD Absol is a nice way of punishing forward rush. And then I just like experienced like in this particular matchup, it was just like this horrible negative loop, and there's just nothing I could do. Like, there's nothing. This team's not equipped to deal with that pairing. And that can be harder to think about in like the builder because like you think combinatorially, ADV50, there's 50 Pokemon, right? That's like quite a few, especially when you consider like some of them are like somewhat redundant. Like if you can handle Golduck, then you can almost certainly handle Huntail. Like just for example. So realistically, I don't know. Let's just still say you want to consider 50 Pokemon, right? It's still reasonable, or like let's say 40. But then consider all of the pairings, and you've got like 40 Pokemon, whatever, that could be paired with like another 40 almost, or like 35 or whatever. Like maybe there's like a bunch that aren't synergistic for each of those Pokemon, but like then you're talking like 1,400 pairings all of a sudden. Like some ones will be more important, and you'll see them more, and like I can produce like statistics if people want it on like, well, here's the most popular pairings and so on, like in terms of sheer usage that, you know, you need to be prepared for. Like Taurus and Kadabra is like common and like pretty good as well. So you need to be prepared for that pairing when you're considering like these loops. But I think this is, to a degree, you can definitely spot it. Like certain ones like might be more in tune to something that you're more like attuned to think, oh, I can see that like a Nidoqueen Fortress Core will just destroy this team. But it's not something where you can just like go through like tip box and be like, every single combination of Pokemon like this team is fine against. There's just no way of doing that, really. The numbers are just like way too much. So that's where like practice and like thinking about the loops and so on, and like that's where that matters, and that's where it goes from making good teams to making great teams, is like understanding that kind of thing deeply and playing with the team like a few hundred games on ladder or something like that. If you can do it, really kind of like push things home and help you understand the game and your team more deeply. And you know, that's also like beautiful. I think like a part of what makes the game beautiful is like developing like that level of understanding, like the intimate details of like how all these Pokemon work together. And I think that also, just sort of like a side note, that like a tier like ADVOUs, like RBYOUs, like really good for this sort of thing because you've got so few options. You can get like so many games with it that you can appreciate the nuances of these positive and negative loops in like a way that's really hard to in other tiers, in like a different way because you aren't seeing the same loops over and over. But yeah, on the flip side, you need to do like a lot more practice like ADVOU to be able to see like those loops in action and see like where the strengths are, where the problems are, and so on. So that's just about where I want to end it. Just sort of want to remind that like a lot of this stuff is subjective. The extent to which these concepts are relevant vary a bit team by team, metagame by metagame. But I think that there's a lot of stuff in here that can be applied like across metagames and like really help you become a better Pokemon player, Pokemon builder, just better at the game, enjoy the game on like a deeper level. And that's really just like what I want to say. So this video has been like a long one, but I think like the whole entire concept of team building is something that deserves 40 minutes. So I hope you've enjoyed. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, add me on Discord, disaster area #0027. That's my Discord nickname, and I'll probably be like that for years and years to come. So if you're watching this like far into the future, feel free to give it a try. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Please share this video around as well if you made it this far. if your friends have like only played the game for a few months, I'm sure this will do like a great deal of good for them as well, and like understanding like the depth and nuances of Pokemon team building. And yeah, that's it. I guess I might also like even add that to some degree you might even be able to apply this like other like card games and stuff. Like it's a bit further afield. I guess with card games it differs a bit because you won't see like everything on your team. With Pokemon, you can switch between Pokemon freely, so there's no limitation on that. With like card games, it varies to a degree. You won't be seeing every option, so maybe like deck building, like Yu-Gi-Oh or Magic the Gathering, or whatever, probably does vary quite a bit more from this. So I feel like there are parallels between like those kinds of games and Pokemon, but like in team building, it's a bit weaker. Um, but yeah, part of what makes Pokemon beautiful is the team building. So yeah, goodbye. Like, comment, subscribe, share the video.